We got another WWE Instagram list this week. This one ranking the 5 best champion versus champion matches ever in WWE history. And yet again, I'm here to correct it for them. I should be thanking them, really, honestly. I mean, they've given me some great material. They've given me some great content here for my show. Their list has Hulk Hogan against the Ultimate Warrior, Wrestlemania 6, in the number 5 spot. So at the bottom of the list. Charlotte Flair against Alexa Bliss from last year's Survivor Series is at number 4. I almost choked on my chicken nugget when I read that. Number 3 is Steve Austin against Chris Jericho at Vengeance. In 2001, that was the night that Jericho became the first man ever to beat Stone Cold and The Rock in the same night. And honestly, that match wasn't even very good. I don't know why it's on here. Number 2 is AJ Styles against Brock Lesnar from Survivor Series last year. And the number 1 greatest champion versus champion match in WWE history is John Cena versus Randy Orton from TLC 2013. Only, of course, it's not. Here's a much better list. Feel free to disagree. You're not going to change my mind on this. And again, this does not include matches outside of WWE. If it did, you can come up with a ton of NWA and WCW matches, maybe even ECW, but we're just limiting this to WWE. So we'll start from the bottom, we'll work our way up to the top. I put my list together, and at number 5, I had Bret Hart against Shawn Michaels from the Survivor Series. And I got to be specific here. I'm not talking about Montreal, because it is kind of weird how not only did Bret and Shawn have 2 different Survivor Series main events 5 years apart, both of those matches were champion against champion with only one title on the line, which I think both times just so happened to be Bret's title. In 92, which is the match I'm referring to, their first match at Survivor Series 1992, Bret was the WWF champion, Shawn was the Intercontinental champion. Only Bret's WWF title was on the line. Fast forward to 97, Shawn Michaels was the European champion. I'm pretty sure his title was not up for grabs. Bret, yet again, was the WWF champion, and I think only his title was on the line. So it's kind of weird how that worked out. And I think the Survivor Series match in 97 may well have been on its way to being a match that you could consider for a list like this. And maybe just for historical purposes, you would want to put that match on here for what happened at the end. I'm not going to do that, though. The match they had in 92 was actually really good. And I would even argue that the match they had at this pay-per-view in 92 may have been, honestly, after the Iron Man match at WrestleMania. See, they didn't even really have that many singles matches together. So you'd put the Iron Man match at number 1 kind of by default, even though I think it's, overrated. It's still a good match. And under that, I would put this one. It was a good match. It was also a turning point in a lot of ways for this company. This company was in a period of transition at that point. They had literally just fired the Bulldog. They had literally just fired the Ultimate Warrior because of, they suspected that they were using steroids or growth hormone, whatever it is, importing growth hormone. And they were really getting serious and cracking down on drugs and steroids and all of that stuff at that time because there was heat on Vince McMahon and the company from the government. And, of course, years later, he ended up on trial. But it was almost like an overnight thing. Ric Flair was the champion. Davey Boy Smith was the Intercontinental champion. And almost in a flash like that, they had Bret beat Flair for the championship on a random show in Saskatoon. All of a sudden, Bret Hart, the tag team guy, the Intercontinental guy, is now the top champion in the company at a time when you still had those guys like Savage and, the natural disasters and all those kind of big guys that the company was known for back then. It was kind of weird that now Bret Hart is suddenly the top guy. Shawn Michaels won the Intercontinental Championship from Davey Boy Smith on Saturday night's main event. Bulldog was gone right after that. So this happened very, very quickly. It changed the matches that were scheduled for Survivor Series. It was originally going to be Savage and Warrior against Flair and Razor Ramon, and Bulldog was going to defend the IC title against the Mountie, and everything changed. And these two guys were given a chance. They took the ball and they ran with it. And of course, they went on to become 2 of the biggest stars in the history of the company. But this is a match I think that gets overlooked a bit because people think of Montreal. Oh, everything's about Montreal, 1997. Go back to 1992. champion against champion. This was a hell of a match. Number 4 on my list, John Cena and Seth Rollins from SummerSlam in 2015. This was the United States champion taking on the WWE champion. These two had an excellent match, probably best match on the show that night, marred only by a terrible finish. This was the match that had Jon Stewart running in randomly and using a chair, and he cost Cena the match. And Seth ended up, I think, with both belts out of it, because I think it was title for title. That finish sucked. There's no other way to put it. They did it because, Jon Stewart's a big name, and we'll have him interfere and we'll make headlines. Fine, but it made for a shitty finish to what was otherwise, I thought, an excellent match, and a match I would still put at number 4 on my list. Number 3, Brock Lesnar and AJ Styles at Survivor Series last year, champion against champion, Raw versus SmackDown. I made it very clear when I reviewed that show last year. I loved that match. I thought that was one of the best WWE matches all year. Brock had, that night he had his working shoes on. He didn't have to do much, I guess, because he was in there with AJ Styles. AJ bounced around like a rubber ball for this guy, made his comeback, and there were some, exciting moments in the match. I love the finish, too, where AJ went for the springboard off the ropes. Brock caught him on his shoulders, hit the F5, and pinned him. This was back when Brock was just beating everybody with one F5 so that he can, give Roman Reigns 6 of them and still beat him at WrestleMania. So much for building the F5 up as something special. What a waste that turned out to be. But that was an excellent match. That was as good a match, I think, as you can expect from Brock Lesnar in WWE at this stage of his career. Brock Lesnar of today is not the same Brock Lesnar from 2002, 2003. That Brock was a wrestler. This guy is, I don't know what word you would use to describe him. He's a wrestler, he's a fighter, he's, when they called him a mercenary on television, it really isn't that much of a stretch, I think, from what he is. He just wants to make money. He's a performer. He comes in, he has his spots and his moves that he performs, and he goes home. And so it's a very different Brock Lesnar than the one that, we used to see many years ago. But when he's in there with the right guy, under the right circumstance, he could still have a great match. I'm kind of hoping, for the same thing tonight at Survivor Series with Daniel Bryan. I won't get my hopes up. But Daniel Bryan is that kind of opponent. He's a smaller guy who can bump around for him, and hopefully Brock doesn't kill him. But if he can get an exciting match out of him, he's probably the best guy for it. Number 2, John Cena against Kevin Owens from Money in the Bank 2015. This was only a couple months before the match with Rollins at SummerSlam. This was champion against champion. Cena was the U.S. champ at the time. Kevin Owens had just been called up. He was still the NXT champion. He got a big, clean win. And I want to say, was it the Elimination Chamber show? Whatever that May pay-per-view was in 2015. He beat him. He beat John Cena clean in the middle of the ring. And so they came back with the rematch. I remember thinking it was too early to beat Owens. I mean, Owens had just been called up. Why beat him so quickly? But it's hard not to say that this was an excellent match. They had a match that I thought was even better than their first one. And this was back during the period where Cena was still trying out some new stuff. He was using that awful springboard stunner. I think he used the code red in this match. But these two went out there, again, maybe not even a full month after Owens had made his main roster debut. And even though he lost, he went in there and had a tremendous showing with John Cena, hung with him every step of the way. And the end result was just a fantastic match. So if you just look at it from a purely a match point of view, you're not going to find very many in WWE, champ versus champ, better than that one. And Cena, Cena's a big name. So it wasn't like, it was a match between two new guys or random people. So Cena gets 2 spots on my list here. But he doesn't get the number 1 spot. The number 1 spot is reserved, and exactly, well, I haven't mentioned it yet, so of course you know what it is. The number 1 spot on this list is occupied by what I believe is still the greatest, I guess, in terms of how epic it felt at the time. Champion versus champion, title for title match in the history of the company, which is still Hulk Hogan against the Ultimate Warrior at Wrestlemania 6. Maybe you had to live through it. Maybe you had to be a kid at that time to feel that way about it. And if you are a newer fan, if you are a young fan, and your idols now are John Cena, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins, and AJ Styles, you probably don't feel the same way. I think a lot of that, when it comes to these lists, you gotta keep that in mind. A lot of that, it comes down to, when did you grow up as a fan? Did you grow up during the Attitude Era? Because if you did, you probably think everything about the Attitude Era is great. Did you grow up in the Golden Era? Late 80s? Early 90s? Because you probably feel the same way about that period. It's hard for me to reconcile that we have young fans growing up today who feel that way about the current era of WWE. It kind of makes me sad. But you will not be able to convince me that there has ever been a bigger champ versus champ match in this company than Hogan and Warrior. First of all, it's the WrestleMania main event. 68,000 people inside the Sky Dome. Babyface against babyface. This is not the sort of thing that we were used to seeing back then in WWE. In fact, we almost never saw that. Warrior was very popular. He was the IC champ. Hogan was the WWF champ. And to put the two of them together like that one-on-one, you had to choose sides. I picked sides with my friends. I was a Hogan guy. Some of them were Warrior guys. I think Edge and Christian have told the story also. Edge was a Hogan guy, and I think Christian was a Warrior guy. Everybody had to choose sides. It was a big deal. It felt like a big event. When those two came nose-to-nose in the ring, and Hebner put the two belts up in the air, I mean, it just came off like the most epic match in the world. And I will say this, I've gone back and I've watched that match since then. And no, it is not a technical masterpiece. But those two guys had a much better match than they had any right to have. It was a pretty good match given who was involved. I still say Randy Savage brought the Warrior to the best matches of his career. But right behind that, you got to go with the Hogan match from WrestleMania 6. The way they laid that thing out, some of the near falls in the match with the ref bump, Hogan missing the leg for the first time, Warrior hitting the splash, Hogan, of course, kicking out at 3.2, because, of course, he had to, and then collapsing to his knees and looking up at the big men in the sky when the whole thing was over. Why? And then handing the championship off to the Warrior when the match was over. Everything about that match felt epic. It felt like a big deal. And there has not been since in this company a match that comes across to me as having that kind of big-time feeling, champion against champion, like this match. I'm not saying it can't happen one day at another WrestleMania. Hey, look, if they don't take the championship off of Becky Lynch and they want to have some kind of a title unification match with them at WrestleMania in the main event, they may end up on the list. Ronda Rousey and Becky Lynch could end up on a list like this, in a few months. Who knows? But to me, there's been no bigger match like that in this company than Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior. I cannot include the ladder match. I know some people are saying, how can you not put Shawn Michaels against Razor Ramon on there? Because that wasn't technically champion against champion, the match they had at WrestleMania 10. Otherwise, it would have been number one on this list. Actually, you know what? I take that back. I don't know that I could put that ahead of Hogan Warrior. It would be neck and neck. I'd have to really think about that. It didn't feel as epic as Hogan Warrior did, but it would be hard for me not to at least consider putting that at number one. So that would be a tough one. But I can't, because it technically, just because there were two belts hanging above the ring doesn't mean, Shawn was going around calling himself the champ, doesn't mean that he was the champion. I could do the same thing. I have a title here. Why don't I go to work tomorrow and I'll walk around with the title and I'll call myself the WWE champion? That doesn't make me the champion. That makes me a psychopath. And Shawn was not recognized as the champion going into that match, and so that's why I decided not to include it. If you want to include it on your list, by all means, go ahead. But if you're being technical about it, you can't put that match on the list.